Why Russia went into Ukraine? Let's go all the way back to 1954, and you can decide for yourself. In 1954, the Crimea transfer. Moscow transferred Crimea from the Russian Soviet Federal Republic to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. At the time, it was all still the USSR, so it was one country anyway, but moving Crimea was like shifting a filing cabinet inside the same office. But it really mattered because even then, Crimea's population was mostly ethnic Russian. What looked like a small administrative change actually planted a seed that would grow into conflict 60 years later. In 1991, the vote of independence. The Soviet Union collapses. Ukraine votes for independence. Over 90% of Ukrainians voted yes, including strong majorities in the east and in Crimea. In Crimea specifically, it was 54% who voted yes, still a majority but smaller than elsewhere. Crimea stayed with Ukraine, but it's under its own autonomy and self-rule on internal matters because its people were mostly ethnic Russian and they demanded it. 1990 and 1991, NATO assurances. During German reunification talks, Western leaders gave verbal assurances to Gorbachev, not 1 inch eastward for NATO. Period. But they refused to sign it. NATO later claimed we had no legal promises, never made. For Moscow, it was betrayal, and they never forgot it. In 1994, Budapest Memorandum gave Ukraine up the world's largest nuclear stockpile, Soviet-era weapons stationed on its soil. In return, Russia, the US, and the UK assured Ukraine's borders and sovereignty. But these were assurances, not guarantees, meaning no one was legally obliged to defend Ukraine if something went wrong. 1997, NATO-Russia Founding Act. NATO said it had no plans to permanently station combat troops in new member states. Well, later, NATO began rotating forces and building a presence in Eastern Europe. Moscow protested. The West ignored it. 2004 to 2013 NATO expansion. More countries joined NATO. Bases crept closer and closer to Russia's borders. In 2008, at the Bucharest summit, NATO declared Ukraine and Georgia will become members. Well, no roadmap, but just enough to cross Russia's red line. Later that year, Russia fought a war to secure Georgia, sending a signal, this is the limit. 2014, Maidan, Crimea, and Donbas. In February 2014, protests in Kiev, the Maidan movement, drove President Yanukovych from office. U.S. official Victoria Nuland was famously caught on tape discussing who should replace him, and also saying, F Europe and what they want, underlining Washington's disdain for regional wishes. Russia called it a coup, the West called it a revolution. Trust was absolutely shattered. Soon after that, Russia annexed Crimea, and through a Russian referendum claimed over 90% support. The UN called it illegal, and Russia said it was self-determination of ethnic Russians who live there. At the same time, war broke out in Donbas, Donetsk, and Lugansk. These regions, home to millions of Russian speakers, resisted the new nationalist government in Kiev. Because language laws were tightened, Russian channels were banned, and separatists declared independence and asked Moscow for military help. From 2014 to 2022, fighting in Donbass killed more than 14,000 people, including over 3,000 civilians on both sides who paid the ultimate price. Minsk Agreements 2014 to 15. 2 deals, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, promised autonomy for Donbass, local elections, a weapons pullback, and eventually Ukraine's control of its borders. Neither side honored them. Both Kiev and separatists violated the ceasefires. Years later, Merkel admitted Minsk was never meant to work. It was just to give Ukraine enough time to rearm. And to Russia, that confirmed the West respects no agreement. 2022, recognition and invasion. In February, Donetsk and Lugansk formally asked Russia for military protection from Kiev's military operations. Putin recognized them as independent republics, declared the Minsk agreements dead, and he took action. The bigger picture, as I mentioned yesterday, in late 21 and early 22, over 80,000 Ukrainian troops massed near Donbas. NATO spy planes increased flights near Crimea. NATO ran war games in the Black Sea and the Baltics. Reports surfaced of CIA and MI6 bases and US-funded biolabs inside Ukraine. To Moscow, this was all provocation. Now, the bottom line. Yes, Putin's invasion was illegal under international law, and it has been catastrophic for everyone involved. But it wasn't random. It was decades of broken promises, NATO expansion, Donbass civilians dying for 8 years, and diplomacy treated as a stalling tactic. Russia broke Ukraine's sovereignty. The West broke promises. Both sides broke Minsk. Final thought, why is it when NATO expands east, it's called defense?